Hello, this is Teemu Villamo, a writer, director, animator and editor of the animated Silmarillion fan films Soul of Fire, Siege of Angband, Beren and Luthien and the Children of Húrin, as well as the voice of many characters, including Fëanor, Morgoth, Fëanor and Túrin, and also the composer of all background music in the films. I thought I'd do this video to explain some of my own thoughts about the films and the writings of Tolkien in general. First I will tell something of the very start of the project, when I first started making Soul of Fire some 4.5 years ago. Soul of Fire is still the most important film to myself, not just because it was the first one, but because the story of Fëanor is by far my favorite part of the Silmarillion. I had long been fascinated with this character and playing around with some ideas for some kind of fan film about him. I must mention such amazing Tolkien fan films as The Hunt for Gollum and Born of Hope as great sources of inspiration, which inspired me to dream about doing something similar. But of course, there was a problem. I was no filmmaker, I had no resources to use, and even if these films were made by ridiculously small resources when comparing to the Jackson films, they still required lots of actors, costumes, shooting at different locations, recording devices of some quality, etc. I had access to none of these. But at some point, I don't exactly remember when, I realized that none of this would be needed in an animation. Only a bunch of voices for the characters and that's it. Everything else I could do myself on the computer screen with my adequate drawing skills. As the final source of inspiration, which lit the spark to really start this project, I must mention a musical student theater called Spexi. This great theater project was organized from scratch by a friend of mine, Mika, who by the way also voices Beor in the Siege of Angband. He just decided that our university campus needs this traditional Spexi musical, which had never been arranged before, and started getting people together to do this. I myself joined his team and played drums in the first musical, and although I haven't been involved in the later productions, the musical has continued as an annual tradition. The point of me telling this is that this showed me how ideas can be made to come true. It really inspired me to start working with this own idea of mine. I actually started working with the script and first sketches of the characters of Soul of Fire during the week when we had the musical shows. Then, when I knew what I wanted to do, it was just a matter of deciding how to tell the story, so writing the script, which was fairly easy since it was quite straightforward, adapted from the source material, and then just drawing. Lots of drawing, all the different scenes with all the characters and locations. That was definitely the most time-consuming part. And when there is enough material to start putting it together, then you can start thinking about the voices and the music. Here, I want to share some of my early experiments for the voices of some characters.
Tervehdys Fëanor, Noldorin ruhtinaista suuri. Mikä oiva päivä tänään onkaan. Tervehdys Fëanor, Noldorin ruhtinaista suuri. Mikä oiva päivä tänään onkaan. Tervehdys Fëanor, Noldorin ruhtinaista suuri. Mikä oiva päivä tänään onkaan. Tervehdys Fëanor, Noldorin ruhtinaista suuri. Mikä oiva päivä tänään onkaan. Tervehdys Fëanor, Noldorin ruhtinaista suuri. Mikä oiva päivä tänään onkaan. Tervehdys Fëanor, Noldorin ruhtinaista suuri. Mikä oiva päivä tänään onkaan. Mitä tahdot? Kerro asiasi, äläkä haaskaa aikaani. 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 Mitä tahdot? Kerro asiasi älkää haskaa aikaani. Mitä tahdot? Kerro asiasi älkää haskaa aikaani.
Then finally comes the point when I can no longer do everything myself, so I needed some voice actors. None of the characters are played by any kind of experienced actors. I have just asked my friends to voice them. And keeping that in mind, I think they did a decent job. Most of the voice actors had absolutely no clue what the story or their characters were like, with the exception of Yami, my good Tolkien fan friend. That was actually very insightful to me when I really had to think how to explain the characters and situations to them to get some sort of realistic sounding voices. But let's still get back a bit. I want to discuss something about the reason why this particular story was the only option for me to start making these films from. So back then I had absolutely no plans for making any further films. I just wanted to give this film a try. And when making a Silmarillion fan film, it just had to be about Fëanor. Because in my opinion, Fëanor is probably the best fictional character I have ever come across in any form of storytelling. He's just such a complex guy, a great elf indeed, with skills matched by none except for Aule himself. The legacy he left the elves is just astonishing. The Fëanorian Tengvar script, most likely the Palantirs, which even Sauron could not recreate, the Fëanorian lamps, and then of course the Silmarils. Such an important figure in the evolution of elven art and culture. But then, completely mad when it finally comes to it. I've spent lots of time, especially during making The Soul of Fire, but also before and after it, trying to figure out what actually made Fëanor do all the terrible things he did. Was he really what you would call evil, or how much of his actions were just due to Melkor's manipulations? Fëanor was a fire spirit, an artist, with enormous passion for everything he did. To that I can definitely relate. I would call myself very passionate about these animations, for instance. But then, with the Silmarils, his passion crosses the line, and it becomes pure greed. In the end, even his own sons are nothing more than just tools to get revenge on the one who stole the precious Silmarils. The question, was Fëanor evil, is an interesting one. I would say that yes. If there is a point in using such a term as evil, then Fëanor definitely was evil. Not pure evil, as Morgoth, but still evil. Although as a side note, I would argue that not even Melkor was pure evil, at least in the beginning, when he very similarly actually to Fëanor just wanted to create things really of his own, but everything turned out to be just extensions of Ilúvatar's power, which must have been frustrating. The Dark Lord Morgoth of later times was probably evil all the way to the core though. But back to the point. From the point of view of the Teleri, it makes no difference what Fëanor had lost. The Teleri did absolutely nothing wrong, and were brutally massacred when they refused to give their ships, which they had all the right to. The one redeeming quality of Fëanor would be that he really cared about his family. Or well, parts of his family. He really loved his father and his sons, but not so his half-brothers or mother-in-law. But by the end, even this one redeeming quality fades away, as his last words are to bind his sons to the oath and avenge his death, dooming them once and for all. Of course, they were already doomed by the oath, but anyway, I see nothing left of a loving father here. And by the way, the scene which I included between Fëanor and Nerdanel is a nice little addition, since it shows how many different people Fëanor has hurt on so many levels. He has not of course done any physical damage to her, but abandons her to get his revenge, and takes all their sons with him, and Nerdanel is left alone, knowing that all of her family will probably die in Middle-earth. And a noteworthy point is that he does not need to live with the consequences of his choices, because when he leads his people to unknown lands, who mostly follow him due to his passionate speech and charismatic leadership, and make them do terrible things on the way, causing them all to be banished from Valinor. What does he do? He gets himself killed at the very first instant. And his people are left leaderless, alone in a hostile land, with nothing more than the shame due to their deeds, which they have to carry forever. Luckily Fingolfin arrived and managed to sort of things at least a bit, before he went crazy too. And yet, Fëanor had lost so much more than anyone else before him. Basically the two first elves to die, ever, were his mother and father. And at the same time he lost his father, he also lost the Silmarils, where he had practically poured his soul. Anyone would go at least a little bit mad by that, but to go to the extent he did. My conclusion about his character could be something like this. He probably had all it takes to become such a crazy, revenge-addicted maniac inside him from the very beginning, and it took just a little bit of manipulation by Melkor to dig it up and push him over the edge. As another greatly complex character once said in an awesome movie.
See, madness, as you know, is like gravity. All it takes is a little push.
So yeah, there was a not so short explanation to why I find Fëanor such a compelling character, and why the first film just absolutely had to be about him. I chose to focus very much on his point of view, so things like the Valar or the darkening of Valinor, for instance, are passed quite quickly. Melkor and Ungoliant I wanted to include more detail though. And anyway, I really enjoyed voicing Fëanor and Melkor and Ungoliant too. I think all of them are played fairly well actually, at least when taking into account that I had absolutely no previous experience in anything like this. Still speaking of Fëanor, I have to mention another of my original sources of inspiration, the amazing song The Curse of Fëanor by Blind Guardian, which plays during the end credits of Soul of Fire. Some of the scenes came to my imagination directly from the lyrics. I really like the small hints in the lyrics that Fëanor might actually have felt some remorse about his actions. In the Silmarillion there are no such hints, but I added some minor hints to the film, mainly the scene where they are burning the ships and Fëanor closes his eyes with an expression that is meant to be remorseful. But then he hardens his mind and decides that he has gone too far to turn back. And another short glimpse when he looks at the smoke rising from the shore for the last time and decides then not to look back anymore. I think this adds an even additional layer of complexity to his character. Okay, I could maybe say something of the later films too. The Siege of Angband was actually quite a difficult piece story-wise. There's really no main story in the film, it just tells what stuff happens to be going on in Beleriand during that time. The writing of the script took quite much thinking, how to combine the different pieces and giving the story some kind of structure. All the other films have been quite straightforward adaptations, but here I had to come up with many scenes of my own. The most sensible choice was to make Fingolfin the main character, and try to portray somehow him becoming more proud of his siege. At the beginning he is a wise king who very well knows the threat of Angband, and at the end he is basically Fëanor. When everything comes crashing down, he realizes his pride was all in vain. I like to think of Fingolfin as some kind of combination of Fëanor and Finarfin. When everything goes well, he is wise and calm, but when the stakes get high, his Fëanorian side takes over. And he does the major thing, riding to challenge Morgoth to single combat. And I think Akke, the voice actor of Fingolfin, did a great job in these scenes where Fingolfin loses his mind and finally follows his brother to the abyss. But all in all, the Siege of Angband was very much a middle piece, which had to be done in order to get to the later stories, although of course the duel is epic. Beren and Luthien was then again a quite straightforward adaptation. In some places I simplify the story a bit, but for most parts it follows the original quite closely. I don't actually have that much to say about it. Perhaps my favorite part is the scene in the halls of Mandos, which I think works very well, even if I was somewhat sad to leave out Luthien's song, which I just don't think could have been portrayed in any such way that it would have felt sad and realistic enough to believe that Mandos actually would return Beren to life because of that. Children of Húrin, then again, it is my second favorite part of the Silmarillion, after Fëanor's story. In some ways, the Siege of Angband and Beren and Luthien were kind of middle pieces I had to do in order to get to this story. I always had the Children of Húrin in mind, and it motivated me further to do the two previous stories also. I really enjoyed voicing Túrin, and I think I really succeeded quite well in portraying his tragedy. Here are some new voice actors too, who I think all gave a decent performance. I have tried to stay faithful to the source material, but of course some changes have been made. Most noteworthy, I would say, are the farewell scene between Fingolfin and Finarfin, and the death of Amrod in Soul of Fire. Let me give some explanation to these. In the Silmarillion, Finarfin follows his brothers until Mandos damns everyone who follows Fëanor, and only at that point does Finarfin turn back, full of shame. In my version, Finarfin stays in Tirion, because that allowed me to add a touching scene where Fingolfin and Finarfin discuss their brother's madness and decide that Fingolfin should go with Fëanor and try to restrain him as best as he can, which of course does not work out in the end. And Finarfin will stay behind and take care of the few who refuse to leave. I really like this scene, and it would not have worked later in the film. Then we have Amrod dying in the first battle against orcs. In the published Silmarillion, all sons of Fëanor survive almost the end, until they get themselves killed in the second and third kinslaying, when they attack other elves, who refuse to give them the Silmaril they have acquired. Maedhros and Maglor of course survive until the end, when Maedhros commits suicide when he finally gets a Silmaril which just burns in his hand. But Amrod dies in the third kinslaying. However, I felt like Fëanor needed still to lose something, which then drives him to complete insanity, fueling his final rampage, which leads to him standing alone against a bunch of Balrogs and finally gets him killed. And besides that, there is an alternative storyline, which Tolkien never got finished, but which, as I understand, would have been his latest idea of how the story went. Here Amrod, or possibly Amras, I'm not sure, actually dies already at this point, although there his death is even more cruel, as he stays in one of the ships intending to go back to pick up Fingolfin's gang that they abandoned in Araman, and then Amrod is accidentally burned alive when his father decides to burn the ships. I actually also considered adding this to the film, but in the end I liked more the naive hope of Maedhros that they would go back for their kin, and so Amrod got to die in battle. And otherwise, no one would have died in that battle, but I think it is a nice touch that the Noldor only now realize that going to war will have consequences, and it will lead to people dying. Then in The Children of Húrin, I could mention that I made Nienor much older than in the original version. In the Silmarillion, Nienor is born after Túrin leaves to Doriath, and so Túrin has never seen her before when he finds her, having lost her memory, and Húrin actually never sees his daughter. However, I liked it more so that Túrin and Nienor knew each other as kids, and I like that we get to see the full family briefly together in the beginning, excluding Lalite, the middle daughter, who died at a young age, who I left completely out of the film. But I think it adds to the tragedy of Húrin's family. I could point out a few mistakes in the films, because no matter how careful you try to be, how many times you look it through, you never spot all the mistakes in time, and some mistakes get to the final version. Mostly they are some parts of the images which are left uncolored or typos in the subtitles. There are also a few story-wise mistakes. In one scene, Turin has the black sword too early, before Beleg has arrived with it. And in the last scene of the Children of Húrin, there's one image where Morwen's eyes look different than otherwise, which I should have noticed but didn't. Let me now talk something of the technical quality of the films. They are of course, on an objective level, technically very low quality films. Perhaps the quality got a little bit better with the later ones, because I, of course, learned to do things better. The best example is the sound quality between Soul of Fire and Children of Húrin, because, let's face it, Soul of Fire has a very horrible sound quality. I used the same software, Audacity, for sound recording in both, but by the time of Children of Húrin, I had realized that it is really easy to do a noise reduction, which practically removes all the background noise. You just have to include some second of silence in each recording, where nothing else than the noise is heard, and you can remove it from the rest of the file. I had all of the tools for this already in Soul of Fire, but I didn't realize I could use it. The funny thing, actually, is that I did use some noise reduction occasionally to the most noisy audio files, but I did not realize I could use it for every single file and get rid of most of the noises. And now the first films have lots of background noise all the time. But well, you got to live with that. Then also, I got a new computer between Berana Luthien and Children of Húrin with a slightly better mic. And especially in Soul of Fire, the music is way too loud compared to the voices of the characters. I simply didn't realize it myself at the time, because I of course knew always what the characters were saying. But I got later a few comments saying that you don't hear the lines very well if you don't know beforehand what the line is going to be. But I think I learned to do this better in the later films. The animations are obviously not very striking either. The reason is simple. I have to draw everything myself by hand, and I simply don't have all the time and effort to put there. But I think I still have managed to make a few very nice scenes where the crude animations work really well, accomplishing much by doing actually very little, such as a few battle scenes. I still have to say something about the music in the films. Almost everything is made by myself, with the obvious exception of the Blind Guardian songs during the end credits. They are all from the Nightfall in Middle-earth album, which by the way is one of my favorite albums of all time. Purely musically too, but then it's also a concept album about the Silmarillion. And by the way, I have had as a principle that I do not spend any money making these films. All the software I have used is free. The only money I have spent was because I had to buy this album. Otherwise, I could not have justified myself using the songs. And anyway, I would have wanted the album in any case, but it was really difficult actually to find it in record stores. But now I had the motivation to really go and find it. But anyway, besides the Blind Guardian songs, in Soul of Fire I had my friends Akke and Jonas, the voices of Fingolfin, Maglor, Finve and Finarfin, playing some instruments, and one short piece with Maglor playing his harp I left for Akke to come up with some melody there. And then in Berana Luthien we have some in-world music too, as Luthien sings a few times. Those were of course sung by Pihla, the voice actor of Luthien. I could say something about a few of my favorite music tracks in the films. In particular, I would like to highlight the tracks I call theme songs of Fëanor, Angoliant, Alqualonde, Fingolfin, Berana Luthien, and Turin. Here are short pieces of those. In Soul of Fire there are also some quite irritating musical pieces where I wanted to experiment with instruments I thought were cool, but maybe could not play that well. And in retrospect, I maybe should have cut out some of the flutes and ocarinas, but, well, they are flaws I can live with. Then something I imagine many would like to ask: are there more films still coming? There probably is at some point, although I still won't promise anything. But I have the scripts done for 2 more films. The next one would be The Fall of Gondolin, and then the final piece, The War of Wrath. And in case you wonder about The Fall of Doriath, it would be included in The War of Wrath, since in my Fëanor obsessed point of view, the key characters there would be the sons of Fëanor, especially Maedhros, and thus the second and third kinslaying would be important things, mainly to their story, but of course also as the fall of Thingol, and thus the way for the Silmaril to lead to the fall of Dior after him. Let me end this video by giving some thoughts about what has been the most important things with these animations, and some additional motivation into doing them in the first place, or some advices for some potential people who might want to do something similar sometime. What does it actually take to do a film like this? In the end, not very much. One of my points in making this has kind of been to prove that, mainly to myself, but of course I'm glad if you agree. For me, it took a computer, nothing fancy, just a basic laptop with Microsoft Paint and some video editor will do. To do animations, you obviously need some sort of drawing skills, but not that much in the end. I know lots of people who can draw much better than myself. Some video editing skills, but I would say most can be learned as you go, as I did. Some musical talent, if you do your own music. Not that I would be that talented a musician in the end. But the one thing you really need, you need a vision. You need to know what you are doing. You need to see the final outcome in front of your eyes as you start the project. Although this can of course change during the process. When I really started making Soul of Fire, I knew very exactly what I wanted it to be like. And the end result is actually quite close to that. Some things I realized I did not have the skill to animate, and the animation is generally much simpler in the end result than in my original vision. But story-wise, the outcome matches my original vision actually very well. The same thing with the other films too. So in the end, you don't need lots of money, or even people or skill to do a film. You just need to know what you want to do, and then the patience to do it.